Hello and welcome to Wise Up with Open Water, your regular dose of wisdom from the open water community. I'm your host, Ken Pasternak. I'm an Open Water founding member as well as a contributor. And I'm happy to welcome Carl Loeb to today's episode, where we'll be discussing one of the defining challenges of modern work: how to embrace artificial intelligence without surrendering the very capabilities that make us valuable. Carl is a creative strategist, a creative director, a writer, and an AI practitioner who has spent the past several years exploring how emerging technologies are changing the way we think, create, and solve problems. Through his work with creative teams and with business leaders, Carl has developed a thoughtful framework for using AI to amplify our uniquely human strengths rather than replace them. So, Carl, welcome, and thanks for joining me.
Ken, thank you so much. Great to see you, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'd really love to start our discussion with a phrase that immediately jumped out at me when I watched one of your presentations recently, and that phrase is cognitive surrender. There's a lot of power and drama in that term, and I'd love to hear what you mean by cognitive surrender and why is it becoming an issue?
Absolutely. First off, I cannot take credit for that term. It is something that is going around in the cognitive community, the business community. It was coined by a paper from Wharton Business School that was released in, I think, January of this year,
Okay.
um, called Thinking Fast, Slow, and Artificial.
Uh-huh.
And I will get into that later because there's a lot to unpack there. But basically, cognitive surrender is when your brain just says, I give up. And the that we reach a point where our brain burns more calories trying to solve a problem than it's worth. Danger signals go off, fight or flight signals go off. They turn into flight, and you're just like, I'm going to take whatever the AI gives me and publish that as my own. And
Mm.
that is cognitive surrender.
Okay. Well, I think I've probably had that experience more than once, so I can relate. Um, what's interesting is that you frame that not as an AI problem, but more of a workplace problem. Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. I mean, AI is part of it.
Uh-huh.
There's no doubt that AI is part of it. But I think if you really look at the situation out there,
Hmm.
AI is it's acting like an accelerant
Mm.
on top of issues that have been building for a long time. Even before AI came along, we'd already reached a place where like we were on this like slope of like productivity gains and efficiency gains. We had reached a place even before AI where it was difficult to find a way to squeeze more productivity and inefficiency, or rather efficiency, out of us. We all, before there was AI, knew what it was like to have a day full of meetings and a day full of memos and an inbox full of stuff that you had to digest. And then AI comes along and it accelerates conditions that were already there. Yeah, I think that's one part of it. Another environmental challenge that you face, and now that we're adding AI to the mix, is that with AI showing up as the new toy on the block, a lot of incentives are just out of whack.
Mm.
A lot of business leaders are being told, hey, I want to see what your plan for AI is. I want to see you implementing AI. I want to see you adopting AI. They're hearing this from the street. They're hearing this from their boards. They're hearing it from the C-suite. And so the narrative that leadership has got to follow is, okay, we're implementing AI, and often without really knowing like who is going to be using it or how they're going to use it or training people in how they're going to be using it. It's just that their incentive structure is to be able to show a dashboard that says, now I'm using AI, and a bonus, I've mandated that everybody use it for 50% of their work,
Uh-huh.
uh, by October. Um, and it's really interesting, again, before I started exploring creativity and hearing about how this affected creative, there was another term thrown around it there called work slop. Have you heard that term?
Work
Work
slop. I've heard
slop?
of slop, mostly referring to AI, but I hadn't heard of work slop. That preceded AI?
Work slop, it was showing up once AI was in there. It's outside of the creative department. I think it was coined by a Harvard Business School paper. But
Okay.
work slop is when, okay, we've all already reached our limit. Now we're being told that we'll be rewarded to use AI for 50% of our work. So all of a sudden, like, you've got like a 50-page paper that you have to understand. You don't have time to do that, so you ask AI to summarize it, and then you ship that summary off to somebody else as your own work and say, "Hey, I read this." And the person who receives that starts reading it. It doesn't make sense, and so they have to spend like 3 hours untangling it and going back to the original source document. Um, and multiply this across an entire organization that's being used to make efficiency with AI when they don't have enough time to think. And so it creates a sense of cognitive surrender and slop and lower quality work across the whole organization. And then I'd say one of the third factors driving cognitive surrender here is just look at the environment that we have right now.
Hmm.
Um, Everybody's afraid. There is, I've experienced myself a reorg every 3 months, followed by a series of layoffs every 3 months. That's happening everywhere. The dominant feeling in most workplaces right now is just fear. And so, underneath all of these other mandates, um, people have heard this referred to as the rationality of the turtle, where the thing that makes the most sense is to just make yourself small, not
Mm.
stick your neck out, not be original, follow those mandates, and start making slop. So, kind of conclude, we have created slop-friendly environments, almost like it's an uphill fight in a lot of environments not to make slop.
Hmm.
And then you add AI into this with all of the other expectations around it without fully understanding how it even works on our brains.
Hmm.
And you've got a pretty potent recipe for cognitive surrender.
Yeah. Well, so I'm hearing quotas, I'm hearing speed and efficiency, I'm hearing overwhelm, I'm hearing a tolerance of slop, creating these slop-friendly environments. Um, there's one other thing that you've talked about that I think I want to add to the mix before we get into how we respond to these challenges, which is this idea of looking at something an AI model might provide you and accepting it, even if it's wrong.
Yeah,
Tell me a little bit
absolutely.
about that because I've heard there have been studies that have been done that really reveal the tendency to do this.
There have been. One of them that I look at frequency was the study out of Wharton that named cognitive surrender.
Okay.
And again, the title of that paper was Thinking Fast, Slow, and Artificial. So, it's like basically, according to, Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, we have two different modes of thinking. There's
Hmm.
the fast, instinctive one, where it's like, oh my God, right away, I recognize that. Then there is the slow, deliberative one. That's where we're actually learning, growing, thinking, solving. And then they add to that, artificial is now a new mode of thinking. We are doing our thinking with an external mechanical partner. It's a reality. We're all facing it,
Hmm.
but we haven't necessarily learned how to do it. And I think if we're not careful, that's something I say a lot. If we're not careful, if we don't watch out, if we're not aware of what's happening in our bodies and our brains, then we can give up that second mode of thinking entirely and give in to what the machine says. So in that study, um, they gave people problems. There were almost 2,000 people who took part in the study, and they were being asked to solve different problems. But they had also kind of seeded prompts into the AI to very confidently serve up wrong answers to people some of the time. They found when they went through this that when the AI was serving up the right answer, but people still had time to think and process it, they went with that right answer 92% of the time. But the thing that was kind of alarming, two things that were alarming. First, if that machine was confidently wrong, and it stuck to its guns, then people were still 80% of the time gonna go along with that machine's output,
Wow.
uh, with it being clearly wrong in the study. But 20% of the people, like they're sitting there, nope, that's not right. I'm pushing back. I recognize the wrongness of this answer. And that's what you're supposed to do with AI. But then they added time limits to
Hmm.
this. They put deadlines on top of this, saying like, well, but you have got like 5 minutes left to figure this out. or else you're going to be penalized. And once that happened, the resistance collapsed. The people who were left were 300% more likely to just go with that wrong answer. So, there are a couple of things happening here. These machines sound really confident.
Hmm.
They give you an answer that sounds really plausible, but it's often not. And
Hmm.
so you have to have enough like time and space and wits about you to be able to push back on that. It's not like a calculator. 2 + 2 = 4 is not what these things are doing. They don't know the difference between right and wrong. They know like statistically plausible, and that's what they serve up. So, yeah, it's like all of these different factors that we find in the workplace. I think especially deadlines and time
Hmm.
are drivers of cognitive surrender.
Yeah, you used the word caution earlier, and I know from experience and being in a fast-paced industry that caution can go away if time pressure builds, right? You just
Yeah.
start to say, good enough, ship it, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, I mean, all the way back to Mark Zuckerberg, move fast and break things. Well, there's a place for that and there's a place not for that, right? Caution does still have a place. And
Yeah,
actually,
especially like if the thing you're breaking is you.
good point. Good point. And in fact, that's what I wanted to get to, which is this idea of what some people have called keeping the human in the loop.
Yeah.
Um, as far as I understand from you, you don't believe that's good enough.
No,
What
I
what is
don't.
good enough? What is keeping the human in the loop? What is the limitation to that? And what would you recommend?
I think, human in the loop started, I think, as, an innocuous phrase that said like there's got to be a human there. But I think too often human in the loop means you need a human in there to be a disaster check for the machine's thinking. And I think that the entire framing of human in the loop, which basically says like you are a cog in the AI's machine, or you are a cog in the machine being built by your organization around this AI, is, first off, it's demoralizing, but secondly, it robs you of the agency that you need to constantly push back against the AI and to remember like I am the human. It is the machine. And so uh, I think the right way to think about our relationship to AI at work has to be one of confidence. Like you are the conductor of the symphony, and
Okay.
the AI is part of your orchestra. So I prefer to say human leading the loop, and I stick with it. It's a change of one word, but it's a very significant change in your status relative to the tools at your fingertips.
So you mentioned the metaphor of the conductor leading the orchestra, which I think is great because it's so visual. You can imagine this person up at the front, waving their baton, and the entire orchestra is coming along, and you've got this person who has the artistic vision, but they need a mechanism for bringing that vision to life, and they've got it in the orchestra, but they've still got to direct the orchestra to produce
Yeah.
it. I'm thinking about workplaces, and conductors are managers or leaders. So talk about how AI becomes the orchestra in that sort of situation.
Um, it's really interesting, and it's something that it's a framework that needs to be embraced, like both by the individual contributors who are using AI, and then especially the leaders who are guiding them. And
Hmm.
you know, I took a look at the overall creative process, which is, you ideate, you gather all your information, you digest all of your information. You start to ideate all around all of your information. You have an idea and then you produce it. And I looked at, each of those different places in the process and asked, okay, how can AI support the creative process and how can AI support originality? And so, I think it is up to leaders to build processes that buy time for us to think again and to like if we're not thinking, if we're not processing, our brains are atrophying. We're not good for ourselves, we're not good for anything. Also, one of the things that constant AI use does is it elevates the lowest performers up to good enough, but it drags the highest performers down to good enough. You've
Mm.
got to find a way to give the highest performers, really anybody who's capable of being original, a chance to get out there. So, yeah, what I've looked at in this process is where are the places that you can deliberately inject AI into it to encourage learning, to encourage thinking, to encourage originality, and not just take over for you and do the thinking for you. It really build systems that are resistant to cognitive surrender.
Yeah, I want to talk about originality, because to me, and maybe to you as well, both as creative people, originality still feels like that's human domain. Um,
I believe, yeah, 100%.
so talk a little bit about that. How is originality fundamentally human? And will AI be eventually capable of originality, in your opinion?
I'm not placing any bets on what AI will eventually be
Okay.
capable of.
Yeah.
But I can stick to like where AI is now,
Hmm.
and even with these frontier models, I do think that I define originality as 1 + 1 = 3. It's this human ability somewhere like in our organic lizard brains we have this ability to connect two seemingly random dots from two totally different experiences, and something about them makes them add up to the sum of their parts. It's in a way that when it happens to you, you have a physical sensation. It's like like a little explosion just went off in your brain. We know what that feels like. When other people see it, they have this physical sensation. It's not logical. And I think one of the keywords is it's not probable. The
Hmm.
way AIs are constructed now is they're still probability engines. You're going to give them, a solution and you ask it, think creatively. It's going to start pulling together unrelated things in a way that feels unrelated. You're going to be looking at that thing going like, WTF? It's like I don't even understand what the AI is trying to do. And so the other mode of the AI is like that safe, you know, the probable. You're getting the statistical output of the LLM, and it's not original. So again, if originality is something that matters to your organization, and in most creative organizations it still does, then you have to make room for that serendipity to happen.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah, in my experience, and you may have similar experiences, there's a quotient of serendipity and just creative leaps, but that's built upon experience, lived experience, right? I even think about I had this conversation with another Carl Stewart, several months ago about the differences between artificial intelligence and ancestral intelligence, and where those two things come together, it gets pretty interesting.
yeah, I mean, describe ancestral intelligence to me.
Well, what I think of when I think of ancestral intelligence is inherited knowledge, knowledge that
Okay.
comes from generations before, but also knowledge accrued through experience of your own.
Right, right. And I think that's true. It's like our brains are so mysterious.
Hmm.
I have there's a one slide in the last presentation I did that said that AI has been around for a few years. Our brains haven't changed in 30,000 years. We have these early Paleolithic brains. Um, it's like they were 20,000 years old before the last ice age occurred. And we've been able to do some really amazing things with them, but we don't understand them, and they are organic. When we feel that panic slowing down, that is like our brains are not getting enough energy, and so they crawl into a little hole to protect themselves. We have to work with the mystery of how our brains operate. And a huge part of that is through the gaining of actual experience.
Hmm.
Humans do that. Like when you're a junior, you learn because a senior boss like made you do it over and over and over and over again until they finally said, okay, this one is good.
Hmm.
Um, we accumulate that experience through the years and almost always through scar tissue. I mean, the old saying, it's like the only problem with experience is you have to get experience to get it, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but AI has not experienced any of these things. AI has experienced nothing. It's read every book on the planet. It's digested every research paper on the planet. It can put things together. It's very good at like digging for research. But when it comes to like the mysterious things that make originality happen or that make us feel,
Mm.
which is the real purpose of creativity, of connection, I think the AI kind of struggles there. I have you know, it reminds me of, in Goodwill Hunting,
Mm.
Will Hunting,
Uh-huh.
genius. He's read every book in the Harvard Library, but he's got real emotional problems. And that great speech where Robin Williams is talking with him, on the park bench, he's like, I ask you what it's like to go to war, you're going to quote Henry V at me. It's like once more into the breach, my friends. It's like I ask you about a starry night, you're going to describe a Van Gogh painting to me, but you haven't lived it. You
Hmm.
know.
Yeah, I think the punchline might have been something like, "You think I know what it's like to be an orphan just because I read Oliver Twist?"
Exactly,
Perfect.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I get
yeah.
it. I get it. Yeah, that's fundamentally different. And I'm wondering, given that fundamental difference, one, the engine is good at one thing and the human is good at another thing. How have collaborations begun to take shape for you? How have you found some success, some bright spots in that type of collaboration using AI, all the research that you've done and all the different trials that you've been through?
Um, I came at this organically as well through a lot of hard-earned experience. I've been through all the cycles of like having the sycophantic AI tell me I'm brilliant and believing it, or telling me that these ideas are genius, or as the AI would say, like that's not just a good idea, Carl, that's a great one. It's like,
That reminds me of Boris Johnson. Have you seen this little Boris Johnson clip on
no.
TikTok or Instagram? He's talking about why he loves ChatGPT, and it's because it flatters him.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I can think of more than a few leaders around this world who would love ChatGPT for that very reason.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, but I think I had my own experiences with cognitive surrender as I was
yeah.
doing this. I tried to learn too much too fast. I trusted the machine too much, and then above all else, I could feel my brain atrophying. I could
Mm,
feel myself giving too much to this machine and not liking it. Um, I did a lot of experiments to see can AI write in my voice, and I trained the AI to like understand my voice. It's a very good editor in my voice. But then I had it write some LinkedIn posts for me and some Substack posts for me, and those were my worst performing, least engaged with posts, uh, really that I've ever put up there. I mean, the drop off was dramatic.
mm,
People just ignored them. And I don't know if that was, LinkedIn's AI filter, but I think there's also a whole lot to like there was just a certain inauthenticity to it. Um, and so I took a step back and asked, okay, how can I incorporate these things that I'm starting to believe about cognition and cognitive, it's like cognitive assertion
hmm.
into my AI practice. It's there actually is a lot of talk about this, and you read papers now about how people are approaching the problems of AI in the workplace and AI in management and working AI into these dysfunctional workplace cultures that we've already built. And they highlight a couple of key approaches. One of them is called, it's got a terrible name, metacognitive maintenance intervals, which
My
sounds
goodness.
awful, but it's basically like you've got to force people to put the AI down and do the thinking for themselves
Hmm.
for a while.
Hmm.
And then there's another approach that I came to on my own, but it is also it's showing up in the literature, and it's called cognitive scaffolding. It's
Oh.
basically using the AI to help you do your thinking.
Okay.
And that's how I've been using it for a while now. I'm very specific in my system prompts. Don't think for me, don't write for me. Um, don't compliment me unless what I've said is like so far like outside of what you expected and it still makes sense that you want to take a note of it. Like I think even the vector space has an area where it goes like, oh, that's interesting, you
Mm.
know. And so the way I've structured almost all of the chats that I work in now, and I'm looking forward to like sharing these with other people is the AI almost always acts as an interlocutor for me. It is dragging things out of me. It gets me into a place where I'm comfortable, where I'm in a flow zone,
Mm.
where I'm solving things. When I get into that zone, memorable things can come out of my fingertips. That's where I become, the writer again, where those little unexpected collisions are happening here. They're coming out my fingertips. It's me solving the problem. And, when I work in that way with AI, it's great. I feel ownership
Hmm.
for what I've produced. I can defend what I've produced. If you ask me what I made, I can tell you exactly what it is and why I believe in it. And I think all of these things are really important to the workplace because if the AI does the thinking for you, you can't do any of those things.
Right.
You can't even remember what it is that you just submitted, um, much less why, or defend it if somebody asks you questions about it, or build on it to get to the next stage. So yeah, cognitive scaffolding.
That's great. It kind of reminds me of like, the guy who memorizes a phrase in French out of the guidebook and he uses it with a waiter, but he's not prepared for the phrase that's going to come back at him, right?
That guy happens to me every time I go to a country with my Duolingo French or my Duolingo
Right, right,
Spanish. It
right. So,
comes out sounding great, and I am not ready for the flurry that comes my way. Yeah.
right. I mean, and that's the consequence of cognitive surrender, right? You got
Yeah.
the thing, you presented the thing, and then the question comes back to you and like, I don't know, I didn't create the thing.
I
But
have
cognitive scaffolding is different. I hear that that's a very, very different process. Yeah.
it's absolutely different. It is working cognition and metacognition into the process. And that changes everything. Imagine a workplace like okay, imagine we continue down the road we're on right now.
Hmm.
In 5 years' time, there won't be any juniors out there who've gotten the training they need to be mid-level people.
Hmm.
They're not learning. They don't have friction. We're also in a place right now where, because of all the slop, the senior creatives, the ones who have the taste and judgment, instead of looking at like 4 or 5 curated ideas that their juniors have brought to them, they're getting buried in 100 plausible
Mm.
ideas that they need to sort through. So they're not adding the value that they should be doing. We're in a very dangerous place right now, and we're living it in real time where we are, if we're cutting the cognition out of the process and we're cutting the learning and the thinking and the friction and the experience, the taste gathering,
Mm.
the scar tissue building out of the process now, where will that put us in 5 years?
Hmm.
I guess at that point, you better hope that the computers can be original
Mm.
because we may not be able to.
Right, right. So that's a concern. That is a moment of caution and good thing to keep in mind. What about the aspirational side of the thing? If you think forward, what would you like to see happen? What are the things that maybe excite you about creative collaborations using technology like artificial intelligence?
I mean, I'm really excited by this. I hope I'm not coming across as some, massive Debbie Downer about this. I'm just pointing out
Yes,
the areas of caution that we have to
sure.
look out for. I think that when we flip the script, there are some things that AI does in my process that are insanely helpful.
Mm.
Like subject matter mastery is one of them.
Hmm.
It's like I tell everybody if you're not using Notebook LM for everything in your life, start using it because it can take the process of actually learning and mastering things from like weeks down to a few days. And and because it hits you with different forms of learning and tutoring, that engage different parts of your brain. And working with that is incredibly exciting. There's also, our ability to like pre-visualize a shoot or even put our comps together. I
Hmm.
think that there is a lot of exciting potential, around AI filmmaking, AI image making. I think it can free us up to be creative in ways that we never imagined before. And I've experienced for myself the power of turning the AI into a live thinking partner. I believe it does help me get to my ideas faster. When I was working as a copywriter, we'd be sitting around in a room and tossing a tennis ball back and forth between each other. And, one of us would get in the zone and they'd say something brilliant, and then we'd stop and go like, what was that again? And be like, I forgot. I didn't write it down. And it's like, okay, let's try to reconstruct that thing because that thing sounded really smart. When you're working with the AI, and you do that, it's like it's right there. It's in the
Hmm.
transcript.
Yeah.
And you can say like, okay, save this on the canvas, put that aside. That one's a keeper, mark it. And I think there are any number of ways that it can help us become like more original thinkers, better thinkers, more productive. Um, but it all really depends on reasserting our right to think,
Hmm.
our cognitive superpowers, our originality, and then also being aware like how can the AI help you protect your human qualities
Hmm.
or assert your human qualities? I think those are the questions that interest me, and I think that AI can be used for just about anything we put our minds to. It depends on what your intention is.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads me to my sum up question. If you were to leave our listeners with kind of one or two things to keep in mind as a result of what we just talked about for the last half an hour, what would those one or two things be?
Um, as a member of the open water community, it's like I've got ideas here and frameworks I'm testing. I would love to talk to people who sound interested about them. I'd like to bounce these ideas around. If somebody's got an organization where I could come on in and pilot some of these, or talk to your creative people, or find out how your different organizations are using AI, I'd love that. I'm still very much in like the research gathering and program formulating stage for this, but I will say I strongly believe that there is a better way to incorporate AI into our workflows and our workplaces. And I'm really passionate about exploring it and
Cool.
helping people to implement it.
Explore different ways the human can lead the loop.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, I love your call for collaboration. I imagine there's a number of members in the community who are coming at this from all kinds of different perspectives and ways, and there's some advanced thinkers and some people who are still on their journey. So, I look forward to hearing what comes your way. How can people get in touch with you, Carl?
Very easy to remember email address. It is carl@carlloeb.com, CARLLOEB.com.
Excellent. Well, wonderful, Carl Loeb. I really appreciate this conversation. I think you've taken us on an interesting journey, a creative one that I can very much appreciate, and I look forward to hearing what happens next.
All right. Ken, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.